where you were when the war broke out and how you wound up from that day to the 12th Armored Division.
Yes, I can remember that when the war broke out, three buddies of mine and I were driving in a car, just taking a joyride around Springfield, Massachusetts when we heard it. And from then on, we all gravitated to different organizations. I got drafted and went to Texas, to Camp Swift, and I went through basic with the 97th Infantry Division in the headquarters company of a field artillery battalion. And just as that basic was drawing to a close, I got shipped out to an ASTP unit at Texas A&M. I spent 9 months there. And then when they broke everybody out of the Air Cadets and the ASTP and put us back in the Army, I went through a replacement depot and ended up in the 12th Armored Division at Camp Barkley. And so I was a late comer to the division. And as I'll tell you later on, I left early. I left about a month before the war ended to go to infantry OCS in Fontainebleau in Paris, near Paris. But at any rate, I got in the ordnance. I was lucky. I didn't get in an infantry outfit or in something to get shot up. Fairly safe. And I liked it. I liked mechanical work. And I was an eager beaver, and I worked hard, and I got promoted to PFC, and I got a 7-day furlough to go home. And I guess that was the start of my downfall, because when I came back, I was no longer a member of a maintenance team working on vehicles, which I had been before. And I got all the dirty little jobs like sweeping the floor and cleaning this and cleaning that. So I was sort of a goof-off, I guess. I like to think that I may not have contributed a lot to the war effort, but I didn't really impede it too much. At any rate, we got ready to go. We moved to Camp Shanks. We went overseas in, I guess it was October of '44, landed at Liverpool. We moved down to Tidworth Barracks near Salisbury, England, and we were there for, I guess a month anyway, before we moved overseas, or over the Channel. We went over the Channel in an LST. I can remember sailing up the Seine River. And we sailed, and finally we got to some place, and we stopped, got out. We didn't know where we were, never did know where we were. And we asked this little French kid where we were. And the kid says, "Ouah." And we asked him to repeat it a couple times. It didn't make any sense, so we asked him to write it on the ground. So he writes R-O-U-E-N. Ouah. Oh, okay, got it. So I remember we were there over Thanksgiving. And then we moved by convoy all the way over to eastern France, past Nancy. And the division was in a lot of action at that time. Herlesheim, Rohrbach, I guess. And after they got shot up pretty bad, so the division was pulled back, and we were retrofitting and getting replacements. And we spent about a month in Fletrange, France. That was our B company. And during that time, it was a time of relaxation, more or less. And I can remember I developed a lot of pictures at that time. I had my camera, and I don't know for the life of me where I got the chemicals, but I can remember trading cigarettes for film at the local, what you'd call drugstores around here, and developing the films in a dark closet. And this little town of Fletrange had dirt streets and sort of a center, and in the center was all dirt except for a stone horse trough full of water, and that's what I used to wash my prints before I dried them. And I was still an eager beaver at that time. And I can remember they finally put me back on a team doing repair work, maintenance work on vehicles. And I was really gung-ho. I got out there one day on this team, and we had this 6x6 that ran into a tree, and it was damaged. And I was working on a fender, and I remember working real hard, straightening out this bend in the fender. And I got it all nicely straightened out, and I moved it over against the truck, and that bend was not supposed to have been taken out. I got discouraged, and I sat down against a tree, and at just that time the company commander drove by. And we had had words before when I goofed off, and this time he saw me sitting down, so a little later that afternoon I was called into the orderly room, and he says, "Taylor," he says, "you're not doing your share to help us here." He says, "We're going to put you in the kitchen. I'll let you work in the kitchen from now on." So that was when I started my kitchen career. And during that time, they came around and said that they were accepting applications for people who wanted to go to infantry OCS. And I said, "Hey, maybe I can, I'm gung-ho, I'll try something." So I signed up for it, forgot about it. And a few weeks later, I get the notification that I'm leaving the division and going to infantry OCS in Fontainebleau. And that was just about on the 5th of April. It was, one of my buddies told me it was Easter Sunday in 1945 when I left. And so I didn't participate in the last year with the rest of the troops. I was gone. So my stay was relatively short. And there was a lot of interesting stuff. Being in the ordnance, you didn't get a chance to participate in any really noteworthy activities, shall I say, particularly when you're at the PFC level. And most of the stuff we did was more in the line of amusing ourselves without hurting ourselves. One such example in Flatrange, when we didn't have so much to do, 2 or 3 of the boys decided to go fishing. And there was this small stream nearby. As I recall it, it was not too wide, but relatively deep for its width. And they had accumulated a collection of German egg and concussion grenades. So their method of fishing was to get one guy down the stream a few feet down the river and downstream, and they would pull a pin on these little grenades and toss them in the water. And you'd get this poof, and they'd search, and that was the method of fishing. And they came back with a pretty large-sized fish. As I recall, it was well over a foot in length for a little stream. It was amazing. So some of the rest of us, we decided, hey, that's a good idea. Let's go fishing. So we accumulated a share of egg grenades, German things. And we went down, and no luck. We poofed them all up in the water, and no fish. But one guy said, hey, I got one grenade left, American fragmentation grenade. Why not? Let's try it. So he pulls the pin, and he throws it at the stream, and he misses the stream. And the thing lands on a bank on the other side. And everybody ducked behind a tree except me. I didn't have a tree to duck behind, so I went face first in the mud. And we could hear those little fragments whizzing by us. And nobody got hurt, but it did sort of put a dampener on our fishing activities. So that it's a wonder we didn't hurt ourselves more than the Germans did, actually. Had another interesting experience down in Texas there. We were on a field exercise at one time, which consisted of a convoy for the ordnance, or for the whole division, I guess it was, or a lot of it. And our job, we had a detachment of 3 or 4 guys that we went out in a 3/4 ton truck to backtrack the convoy looking for disabled vehicles or anybody that was in trouble. And I was the driver. And the half track, the windshield had been removed, the bows on the back had been removed. So the highest point on the vehicle was the steering wheel. And as I was driving, the convoy was coming the other way, and we came up the stem of a T, like a side road intersecting a main road. And the convoy, as I came up the stem of the T, the convoy is coming from my right and making a left turn onto this stem, so I had to pull way to the right to make room for him. And along the main road, there was a sizable ditch. And when there was a break in the convoy, I remember distinctly there was a lieutenant colonel out there directing traffic. And he gives me the come ahead signal, and I start to move, and the other two guys in the back, I guess, and one in the seat side of me says, "Stop, Taylor, don't go, stop." And when a lieutenant colonel tells you to go, you know, you go. So I went, and the front wheel of the vehicle went off the shoulder into this ditch. And I couldn't stop it, and it very slowly just rolled right over to the right. And the other guys, they jumped out, and I'm a slow reactor, I guess, and I didn't jump until too late, and I landed in the bottom of the ditch on my hands and knees, and I could hear this truck rolling over on top of me, and my thought was, there goes my back. I can remember thinking that. And the truck rolled over, so it was exactly inverted, and the hood was on a slope on one side of the ditch, and the tailgate was on a slope on the other side, and the top of the steering wheel was just touching the bottom of the ditch. And the thing dropped over me just like a bird, you know, you have a box trap for catching birds, just dropped over me. It never bruised me, never scratched me or nothing. And the guy's yelling, "Taylor, Taylor, are you hurt?" "No, I'm not hurt." And so there's a little opening there, you know, in a 3/4 ton you don't have a door, you have a cutout, and that was open, so I was able to crawl out. And I think they did more damage right in that vehicle and getting it out of the ditch with a wrecker than I did putting it in. But it didn't endear me too much to the Sergeant Lehman. And I got into another bind like that in England. We were on a night convoy in a 3/4 ton truck with bows on the back, and it was all rigged up. Guys could lay down in the back there, and 3 or 4 of them were, I guess. And the driver got tired, and I offered to drive. And so I hadn't driven for weeks. And I was passing, they had a convoy, a whole bunch of, I don't know, tanks or vehicles parked on the right side of this narrow road. And I'm passing them at night, and I gave them a little bit too much leeway. I want to make sure I didn't sideswipe somebody. And I got off into a ditch on the left side of the road with a 3/4 ton. And again, we had to winch it out. The 3/4 ton had a winch on the front, and we winched it out, but it really made a mess of the cable in winching it out. And again, I'd sort of lost favor with my sergeant. And then the straw that broke the sergeant's back, him not being a camel, was over in, I forget where it was, past Nancy, somewhere in eastern France. He'd sent 2 of us out, John Parker and myself, in a 3/4 ton truck to get water at the watering point. We had to always get chlorinated water. He didn't drink the water. And we picked up our water, and I talked John into letting me drive the truck on the way back, because I hadn't been driving for such a long time. So he had been being a good sport. He let me drive the truck, and I ran into the same problem. I come up the stem of a T, which had a big sort of an embankment or ditch on both sides of it. And as I approached the crossroad of the T, there was a tank coming from the right and a 6x6 coming from the left, and me and the 3/4 ton coming up the stem. And I figured out I was the only one that could move. So I tried to go make my right turn, and the right wheel started off the edge of the ditch, just like I'd done down in Texas. And this time, though, we stopped and called the company, and they sent a wrecker out to pull it out before it tipped over. And when I got back, old Sergeant Lehman was in a frightful frenzy. He jumped up and down, and he hollered at me, and he says to John, "Don't ever let him drive a vehicle here again. Do you understand that?" And he gave me a sledgehammer, and he put me to work breaking up tracks. At the time, I think, as I recall it, all the tracks on the tanks were being replaced with rubber cleats instead of metal cleats to give them more traction or something. And I'll never forget that to my dying day. But he was very irate, you might say. I took a lot of photographs, and every time I come to one of these reunions, I bring them along. But our company does very poorly. Last year, I was the only representative from B Company here. This year we got 1, 2, 3, I think possibly 4 guys this year. So that's an improvement, but
You said you were in the ASTP.
yeah, that was.
Tell me about your experience with that and your feelings about that.
Oh, well, I went in there directly out of basic, and it was an engineering freshman year, and it was a breeze for me. Well, I did real well in high school, and I'd been going to a night school before the war started. I'd been an apprentice toolmaker machinist at GE in Lynn, Massachusetts. So I had all the stuff that they were teaching us I had before, so I was breezing through. And most of the guys that I was directly associated with were high school graduates, I guess, but they were having a tough time. And I can remember spending a lot of time coaching them. And I can remember a couple of them there that instead of studying their lessons, they would practice cheating. They would they'd learn how to write things on their cuffs or on these little papers that they'd stuff on their shirt, and they'd have these little bitty pads, and they'd make these notes, and they'd practice flipping the pages with one thumb under the table, and they'd have all the information that they wrote down there. They were pretty good at it. And that got capped off one night just before an exam. Two of these guys that were real pros at it, they come in and they said, "Taylor, we'd like to have you show us how to do these 3 problems here. Physics or something like that, as I recall." And I says, "Okay." So I worked these 3 problems out for them, and okay, fine and dandy. So next day we go into the test, and I start doing the first problem on the test, and I said, "My, that looks awful familiar." And I looked down, and here are the 3 problems I'd done the night before on the test. Apparently they'd bought off somebody in a professor's office or something and got a copy of the test, and so I think everybody in our group there got 100 on the test. I don't know. It was just before they closed us down, so it didn't matter at all. But it was we had great expectations. Nothing came of it. But again, it was a nice refresher. And then finally, when I did get out of the Army, I went to Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And again, having all the background, I just coasted for first year. After that, it got a little tougher.
How did you find out they were going to be shutting down the ASTP?
I have no idea. All of a sudden we knew it, and I forget the details. I'm not much on details.
So from there you were transferred?
Yeah, we went through a replacement depot, and it was sort of ridiculous, I thought, but they probably had their reasons. But I wanted to get back into a field artillery unit, and so I told the guy, "Yeah, hey, field artillery, fine, I'd like to go there. Basic in the field artillery, liked it." So he puts me in ordnance. And everybody that went there, they seemed to deliberately put them into an organization where they had no experience. And when they had experience pertinent to a given organization, they put them somewhere else, and then they'd take somebody else with no experience and send them to school to do the same job that this guy had been trained to do. They couldn't make head nor tail of it.
So from there, you were shipped out. And, what do you remember of your time in England?
Oh, in England, I can remember riding on the train down to Tidworth Barracks, and I remember one day we rented bicycles and rode them into Salisbury, which was a pretty good, I don't know, it was 10 miles, something like that, maybe a little more or less. And we saw the Salisbury Cathedral and looked all around. And that night, when it got time to go back, it started to rain. And we had this long bicycle ride back in the rain, which we didn't like, but the division, I guess, had a lot of transport trucks there, and they were picking up guys, and we were lucky to be able to get a ride in the back of a 6x6 all the way back. But the 6x6 was full of guys who had been out there drinking all day and all night, and they were a sad bunch, let me tell you. But I never got the habit of drinking very much until we were over in France. Well, maybe in England. Well, it started in England when they started giving us a ration. You'd get a ration of, I forget how many cigarettes, maybe a carton a week, maybe not that much, maybe only a couple packs. And they give you a ration of a couple bottles of beer every month, I don't know, week maybe, I don't know. But I had no use for either of them, so I'd swap them off for chocolate, and I loved hot chocolate. But it got to the point where I didn't have much trouble with the cigarettes, but when I swapped the beer for one buddy, I'd get two other buddies mad at me. So finally I started drinking the stuff myself to protect myself, so I wouldn't lose all my friends. And I can remember another experience there. As I say, I didn't impede the war effort too much, but I did my share. I can remember at Tidworth Barracks, they had a big gymnasium up there, and when we had off time, we'd go up and play basketball. And one day I went up to the company commander and I asked him, I said, Captain, there's a bunch of us that would like to play basketball, and if we went up there and played basketball afternoon, we'd get a lot more exercise than we would on this road march that we got scheduled. And can we do that? And the captain says, no, you got to go on the road march. So I recruited 2 or 3 or 4 of the guys, and I said, let's skip the road march and go up there and play basketball. So I went up, and none of the other guys showed up, but there was guys from other units, and I played basketball for an hour, 2 hours. And I went back to the company area, and I was taking a shower, and the company comes marching back in, and the captain addresses them for a few minutes. I was in a shower across the street, and he dismisses them. And so then I sneak out of the shower, go up to my room, and put on my clothes and get dressed. And a few minutes later, a Red Cross clubmobile shows up, and I'd never seen one of them before over there. And they had coffee, which I wasn't interested in, but they had donuts. So I went down and got a donut, and just as I was turning away, the captain taps me on the shoulder, and he says, Taylor, he says, you're wearing a sweater as an outer garment. Didn't you hear that little speech I just gave about not wearing the sweater as an outer garment? And I said, no, sir. And he said, well, weren't you in that formation? And I said, no, sir. He says, well, where were you? And I says, I was up playing basketball. And he sort of choked a little, and he says, when you're through with that donut, come in the orderly room. And so a little later I went in the orderly room, and he chewed me out and threatened to take out my PFC stripes. And at $4 a month, I think it was $4.80 a month. But he didn't. And that's how I first got on his list. Nothing exciting, just another miserable experience I remember over there in the Tidworth Barracks. We had, for mess hall, we had to go, there was this old brick building, and it had these, in the building they had several of these chimneys, and in front of each one of them there was a brick, excuse me, a brick structure, maybe a foot high and a foot and a half or 2 feet wide, that stuck out about 4 feet, and it had a fire pit at the end of it, and big kettles of hot water that we boiled for them to wash their mess kits in. So one of the tasks that you get stuck with was getting up early in the morning, starting the fire, and getting the water boiling. And I remember how difficult it was with the wood to get it going. And I remember one day one of the guys had the bright idea, let's throw a little gasoline in there to accelerate this thing. And he threw the gas in and then a match, and the vapors going up that chimney ignited, and it poofed. It didn't really explode, but it poofed. And there was a clean-out door up in the chimney about head high, and it blew that out. And with it, you know, there comes this cloud of carbon and smoke filling the pot of water. That was funny. But what I was going to mention was when I wasn't doing like that, we'd get up for breakfast in the morning, and we have to go in the dark over where we were served. And you always tried to be first in line, so if there was any seconds available, you would finish in time to get a shot at the seconds. So I can remember getting up in the dark, mess call, and running fiercely in the direction. And in the dark, I tripped over a little stone, a brick fence about this high, and whacking my shin bone on it, and I still got a sore spot there. Let me tell you, I could, for years, if I would just brush up against a sofa cushion, I would get the same agony all over it. Apparently the nerve ends were sticking out there. But that's the hazards you had in the ordnance, you know. But there were, as I say, there were guys that did a lot of work. Like I remember working on tanks in the bitter cold. I remember one of them where we had to replace the final drive, the whole curved front end of the tank with the drive shaft and the drive sprockets on was damaged on this tank, and we cannibalized. We had to take one final drive off and put another one on, and it's held on by a series of large bolts. And I can remember being the guy who went on the inside of the tank and held the wrench on a nut, while the guy on the outside used an air wrench or something to back the things off, and how cold it was in that tank. Another thing I remember is when the division moved down to Colmar, they attached us to the French First Army, I guess it was, and we were sent down there to help wipe out the pocket the Germans had on the west side of the Rhine River at Colmar. And as usual, at that time I was on one of these small detachments. There was maybe 5 of us that went forward with the tank battalion to do first echelon maintenance, do what we could. If we couldn't handle it in the field, then the tank or vehicle would be returned to the rear for more serious maintenance. So as we moved into the outskirts of Colmar, we were looking, as usual, for a place to spend the night, you know, a house or something we could move into. And we came to this, in the outskirts, there was in this fairly narrow road, there was a little clearance on the side, and over to the left side there was a nice looking house, it looked vacant. So we stopped and look, nobody was in there, so we took it over. And then we found out that just a few hours apparently before as the tanks and the infantry guys moved through, somebody had pulled off into this cleared spot side of the road, and the Germans had mined it. and a half-track hit the mine, and it blew the hood off the half-track across the road, right over the roof of this house, and it landed in the backyard of that house. But fortunately, the half-track was sandbagged, so it didn't, nobody got hurt. But we said, hey, it could have been us, you know. And the other interesting thing down there was the fact that down in the cellar there were 4 or 5 enormous kegs of wine. And as soon as things got cleared out a little, the tankers would come in with their 5-gallon water cans and fill them up with wine and take them out and have a little party that night. And at the time I drank very little or nothing, and I thought to myself, you know, if those Germans could plant a landmine across the street, they could dump something into those wine barrels there, and I don't think I want to try it right now. But after 3 or 4 days, as I recall, we're there, and I didn't hear any bad news. So when we left, we all bottled up half a dozen bottles of wine and took them with us.
What do you remember about the Herlsham area?
I was not connected with it. At that time, I never really knew where we were. I knew when we were in Flatrange, we learned the name of that town, and I knew where Nancy was, because that was a big town, and occasionally we'd get passes into Nancy. And I knew where Saint-Avold was, because that had a few stores, and it was one of the places where I used to trade cigarettes for film. But other than that, I rarely knew where we were. Once I got it from when we were at Flatrange, I got a 3-day pass into Nancy. I can't remember too much about that other than looking at the photographs I took of my buddies. And then, must have been within a week or 2 later, the passes were drawn out of a hat. You put everybody's name in the hat, draw the name out, and that's how I lucked out. I got this pass to Nancy. And a few days or a week or so later, they had another drawing. They had the company would get so many passes, issued to them, and we had 2 or 3 passes for Nice on the Riviera available, and they drew my name out again. And there was a little discussion about that. Isn't it fair for this guy? He's already had a 3-day pass, and you're going to give him another pass to go to Nancy or to Nice? But they said, well, it's the luck of the drawer. So I was able to go to Nice for a week, and it was something after being in all that cold up in northern France to all of a sudden get off the train just the other side of the mountains in Nice, and we had to walk, I think, about a mile with our duffel bags on our shoulders to get to the hotels down along the shore. And by the time we got there, I was sweating, and I don't think I ever cooled down until the day I left. That was an interesting experience, going to Nice. We were able to take, you couldn't get into Monaco. They wouldn't allow the U.S. soldiers in there, but you could take a bus tour, and the bus would go up in the mountains. Monaco is a very narrow principality along the coast there. You could take this bus tour, and they'd go up in the mountains, and you could look down, and you could see the gambling casino and the sportsman's palace and the hydrographic museum that the prince ran, or the king, or whatever, and take pictures. And I went on one of these sea excursions where they go along with a boat along the coast, and you can see the same stuff but from the sea level, and took a lot of pictures there. So that was very enjoyable.
Do you have any memory in particular that stands out more than others of your time during the service with the 12?
I don't think so. I think what I've been telling you is, the things that stand out. I was never I haven't got any, I don't remember the details. Like I was telling you about the episode of fishing with the hand grenades. A couple of years ago, I was out to Bakersfield, California, visiting one of my guys that I was quite buddy with in the 12th Armored Division. And I told him about the fishing excursion, and he says, "Oh yeah," he says, "I remember that first group that brought the fish back." And he also remembered that he'd given me a German Mauser rifle that I carried for some time over there, and I'd completely forgotten both of those. And some of these people that I talk to have marvelous memories. They can remember all these details, and I just remember the high points.
Well, what do you remember about the end when you're headed back to OCS and things start coming to a head? What do you remember?
Well, I remember going across the bridge in Würzburg in the back end of a 6x6 on my way to Paris. I guess I went by train most of the way, but I was on a 6x6. And as we were going across the bridge, they had a whole column of German PWs. They were marching across this bridge, and I took a picture of them. And when I was in OCS, I showed the picture to one of the guys, one of the classmates there, and he says, "Hey," he says, "I remember that bridge." He says, "I was a POW, and the Germans marched us across that same bridge when I was a POW. Very coincidental." But yeah, OCS was, I thought, kind of ridiculous. Then the war stopped May 8th, just about a week or two before the end of the war. And the story I understood was that the officers in charge made the decision that the Army wouldn't need so many second lieutenants. So they really brutalized us. They took every other guy up for a final board. A final board is you go in and you salute, and you got a major and a colonel and captain, and they ask you some questions and decide whether they want you to be an officer or not. And I had marginally passed everything except for the final board, and I was a little nervous, and they noted it, and so the next day I'm in a ship enlist, and they don't want anybody in there that has any tendency to be nervous. In fact, I think that was one of the things they do in most training camps like that. They put the pressure on you to see if you can take it. And so I never got my commission, which was very nice, because I had no business at all being an infantry lieutenant, believe me. I think slowly.
So after that, what happened?
Oh, I went through a replacement depot, went into a couple of, I think maybe two ordnance outfits. I remember one, 3408 medium automotive maintenance. And we did different things. First, we were doing maintenance work again, and I liked that. We were working on vehicles. But then they changed our charter, so to speak, and all we were doing was we were maintaining a vehicle pool, and we'd just go around and check all the vehicles every week and make sure that they were full of water and everything was in top shape. So, and then finally they came to me one day. I'm a PFC, and they said, "Taylor, we're going to put you in charge of the vehicle pool." The two sergeants, we had two staff sergeants running it, and they're going home on points, and we're going to put you in charge of the vehicle pool. And the vehicle pool was 100 or more vehicles, and we'd received vehicles from maintenance outfits that had been reconditioned and gotten ready for reissue. We put them in the lot, and then when people came in with requisitions for vehicles, we'd get some of the troops that were working would go up and get the vehicle out of the pool, and we'd issue it to these people. most of them officers. And of course, when an officer came in, he always wanted the best. And we weren't supposed to let him pick and choose, so there was always a little problem there. But I can remember being very gung-ho about that, too, because here I am replacing 2 staff sergeants, and man, I got to work on it. I took an inventory, I checked their inventories because their books were a total mess. They had vehicles on the books that we didn't have in the lot. They had vehicles in the lot that we didn't have in the books. They had to submit a weekly tonnage report, which supposedly told the total vehicular weight of everything in the lot, and it was out of whack by at least 100%. And it was ridiculous. So I had the guys that were doing the work that I was supposedly directing to go out, and we found out where all the vehicles were and put them on the books. And the ones that were on the books, I don't know how we got them off the books. In the tonnage report, I talked to the people at group, battalion headquarters or something, and they said, well, just lie about it a little each week until you get it back into shape. And so I was doing a great job. I found out why they were having so much trouble with the books. The vehicles would, when we accepted them, they would come into a little temporary parking lot. The paperwork would come into the office, and we had 2 German girls in there that would enter the vehicles in the books. But while they were sitting there, sometimes somebody would come in with a requisition for a vehicle, and these guys that were running it before, they didn't pay any attention, and the guys would take a vehicle out of the temporary parking lot and issue it before it got on the books. Then the German girls would look through the books to write it off as an issued vehicle. They couldn't find it, so they'd write it down as issued, but they would never, when it did get up, when the paperwork did finally get through to indicate that it was received, it was never cross-checked, and so it was a total mess. And I did a real good job, you know. I was proud of I enjoyed the work, really. And then one day the lieutenant, I think he was a lieutenant, the company commander then, he says, Taylor, he says, you're doing a real good job there. You know, I says, we're going to take care of you at the end of the month. I says, fine, I like that. And I says, here I'm replacing 2 staff sergeants and doing, you know, it's a fairly responsible job. They got to at least make me a T4, you know, not a T5, but T4 or buck sergeant or something like that. So the promotions come out and I get promoted to T5. You know, that's not much better than a PFC. And then a few days later, the lieutenant calls me in and he says, Taylor, he says, you're doing a good job up there. He says, but you don't have enough rank for the position. He says, so we're putting Sergeant so-and-so in charge up there now, and you'll be reporting to him from now on. I said, oh, yes, sir. And I think that was the last bit of useful work I ever did while I was in the Army. But I tried.
So what do you remember about going home?
Going home, the SS Webster Victory out of Antwerp. Antwerp, I guess it was, yeah. I can remember waiting for that thing, and I remember coming down with something. I don't know what it was. We used to refer to it as scabies. I itched from the bottom of my feet to the top of my skull for a few days, and the medics would give me this blue ointment, and nothing seemed, oh, it was miserable. Itch, itch, itch. And I never thought much about it until I got home a few years later, and I'd gone into a doctor's office for an eye examination, or I had a infection in my eye. He says, are you allergic to penicillin? And I said, hey, you know, just sometime before I had that episode with that itching, I'd gone through a series of penicillin shots for an injury to my leg. That was another story. After the 12th Armored Division when we ran into a tree. But I'd taken the shots for penicillin. I says, maybe the penicillin caused that reaction. And so I still don't know about it. But we got on the SS Webster Victory, And I can remember coming home, these big, colossal crap games and poker games. And everybody, we traded in all our German marks, the occupation marks for U.S. money. And these people, some of the guys that had been dealing on a black market and everything, they had wads of money. I had a couple $100, I guess, but these big crap games that one guy would be handling a roll of bills and his partner would be shaking the dice, and let's get in, $5, and pretty soon I lost $50, $100. I forget that, I never won once. I don't know how straight those dice were either. I can remember going down and getting into a quarter crap game and making $25, and I said, hey, my luck has changed. I went back upstairs and lost another 50. But a lot of guys made an awful lot of money on that trip, I'll tell you. But the thing you remember most about it was, for a change, you got first-class food. I never remembered too much about the food over in France and Germany. It was always adequate. But on the way back for the first time, we got milk. It was probably frozen or something, I don't know, or dehydrated, but it was milk for the first time in a year and a half. And that was nice. And they were telling us stories. The sailors are saying on the way over, they're bringing replacements over. And these were a bunch of wise guys. They're putting salt in the sugar, and doing all sorts of wise guy stuff on the way over. So they got a bare minimum. And on the way back, we got the rewards, because everything that they didn't eat, the ice cream and the milk, we got on the way back. That made up for the trip on the way over. Didn't mention that, did we? We went from Camp Shanks, we went to New York, POE, got on the Empress of Australia. It carried, I think, about 5,000 of us. And it was a German vessel that the English had taken away from them in the First World War. And but it was English run. And the food was miserable. We had two meals a day, and it wasn't enough to feed a canary bird. And I can remember sitting at a table with 8 or 10 guys, and they'd give us toast and one egg or something, and a little plate of jam. There wasn't enough jam on there to cover one slice of bread. And I can remember Sergeant Lehman flying off the handle and going after these English guys and telling them we want some more jam for our bread or something like that. And then they had, all the way across, I guess they were feeding us mutton. And it was horrible. And the way I understood it, when they're leaving England with English troops, they'd have all first-class food that they'd saved up from buying it in America, and they'd feed it to their buddies, the English. But on the way back, they'd feed us the mutton that they'd. So it didn't make us too happy with the food situation. And I can remember they, after a few days out, were starting to get mightily hungry, and they said that the ship's store was going to open up, and they would have soft drink available and chocolate bars. And everybody got out and stood in this horribly long line, and this got a canteen cup full of this soft drink, which was not carbonated, of course, and as I recall, didn't taste like much. But the chocolate, you could only buy these 24 bars in a box, and it was some English chocolate which apparently didn't have much sugar in it. And as hungry as I was, and as much as I liked chocolate bars, I couldn't eat it. I gave it all away. And that was I didn't get seasick. I was lucky there. I remember going across the channel on the LST. We were on the boat over at least one night, and just sitting there at the dock, a number of the guys got seasick. And the English Channel was not all that smooth when we went out there, but that didn't bother me. But another thing I remember about the Empress of Australia, our company did guard duty. They'd set you on guard posts at different points in the ship, and you'd stand there for 4 hours, 2 hours, I guess it was. 2 hours? I think 2 hours. And do guard duty, whatever that meant. And one of the posts that I stood on was at the bottom of a stairwell leading up into the officers' mess. And after all the horrible food we got, I'd stand there and watch these English stewards carrying squab under glass on trays up the stairs to the officers' mess. And they'd have these little tables with linen and silverware on them. That's how the English treat their officers, so our officers got treated pretty good. But the rest of us weren't too happy. But we lived through it.
You said you hurt your leg, and that was one reason.
Oh, that was after I left the 12th Armored Division. And the war was over, and we all had company clubs, and every night you'd go out and drink as much as you could hold, and then go back to your area wherever you were and sleep it off. And I can remember I always swore up and down we had a lot of guys from the 69th Infantry Division around, and they were a hazard on the road, I'll tell you. And but this one night, for some reason, I was at the company club drinking with the rest of the troops, and when it got time to go back, there was three of us on a detachment in this room, in this old German barracks. And we start back, and one of the fellows was driving, I think his name was Johnson. I was sitting in the right seat of the Jeep. There was a German girl sitting in the middle, and one of our third roommate in the back seat. We're driving down this big avenue in Kassel, Germany. And I don't think he was doing particularly fast, but it was dark, and he hit a shell hole in the road that threw him out of control. And he went up on a sidewalk, and he was just coming off the sidewalk when he hit this big tree head on. And the next thing I knew, they were picking me up off the ground. They said, "Come on, got an ambulance here. We're going to take you to the hospital." I said, "I don't want to go to the hospital. I'm all right. What's the matter with you guys, you know?" Yeah. And they said, "Well, all your friends have gone to the hospital." I said, "Friends? Where do you mean? They gone?" And sure enough, I'd apparently been out for a half an hour or more. And they took them all off the hospital. They were all cut up pretty bad. Johnson, the guy who was driving, he was cutting his shins, and he'd hit the windshield, and he was cutting his forehead and his legs. The German girl was cut up. And the poor guy in the back, he'd come forward and hit the windshield wiper, and he had I think it took something like 60 or 70 stitches to close up his scalp. And all I got was a whack across the shin bones. And so I remember going back to the compound where we were, and when I got back there, I realized that this vehicle, this Jeep that Johnson had been driving, was one that we had sort of liberated from somebody else's motor vehicle pool. It didn't really belong to us, and we didn't want the MPs to find it. So I went back. I got a couple other guys out of bed with a 6x6. We went back and towed the Jeep back into our compound so the MPs couldn't find it, and went to bed. And the next morning I couldn't even climb out of my sack. I was so sore. Oh, I ached all over. I finally got up, and my buddies were all off in the hospital. And after a while, one of the lieutenants, there was 2 lieutenants on this compound that were in charge of everything, and they come in, they want to interview me about this accident we had last night, you know, and he's asking questions. He said, he says, "Was there any drinking involved?" And he says, "Well, of course, 1 or 2, that doesn't matter," you know, he writes that off, and what happened, you know, and he whitewashed the whole thing. But he said, "Why did you bring that Jeep back here?" And so I told him, you know, I said, "Hey, it wasn't our Jeep, and we didn't want the MPs to find it." He says, "Well, that's reasonable, that's reasonable." So the whole thing got whitewashed. But it left me with a scarred leg, and that's what eventually I kept getting these infections that were really bad, and finally on that they gave me penicillin and just whacked it just like that. That stuff was good. But that's the penicillin I was worried about when I had that eye infection, and the doctor brought it up. Maybe I was allergic to it. I'm not sure.
Well, what do you remember when you first saw land coming back?
Oh.
Did you come into New York? Or what did
Oh
you
yeah, we come into New York in Kilmer. I've even forgot the name of the place. Probably Camp Kilmer. And I don't even remember how we got from the boat over to Kilmer. The only thing I remember about Camp Kilmer, two things. I remember when we first got in there was some guy came up to our dorm I call it, barracks, and he says, "Hey man," he says, when I was over in Switzerland, he said, I ran into a real good deal. He says, "I got a few of these Swiss watches, and so we were looking at them. Hey, they look nice, Swiss watches, and I'd always wanted a watch, and $30, okay, fine and dandy." So a bunch of us, we all bought these Swiss watches off the guy. And the next day we find that they're selling them in the PX there for like $25. And the other detail I remember about that was, of course, we were always warned, never bring any guns or ammunition home with you. And over there, I mentioned a German Mauser, and I don't recall why I didn't send that home. I should have done that. I sent a German pistol home, and I had an M1 rifle that I picked up. In one area, we moved into this building, and it was this brand new M1. It looked like it just barely had the grease off it. And so I carried that for several months, I guess. And I was going to smuggle that home in my barracks bag, but finally I chickened out and I turned it in. But I did figure on smuggling home a .45 that I'd picked up. So when we get to Camp Kilmer, they go over it again, and the word came down that 2 o'clock we're having an inspection, looking for arms and ammunition. Everybody have everything laid out. And so here I am with my .45 carefully hidden away, and having a little, sweating it out a little, and we wait and wait and wait. And finally some corporal comes to the stairs. We're up on the 2nd floor. And he says, "Anybody up there got any ammunition?" "Nope." "Okay, inspection's over." So I made it. But I'm glad when they checked us out at Camp Devens. I'm from Massachusetts. And last thing they did, they had some sergeant open up your duffel bags, and he looked in there and ran his arm down the side to see if you had any howitzers or anything in there. But all in all, it's one of those experiences you wouldn't take money for, but you wouldn't want to do it again. Got a 36-hour pass to London one day while we were at Tidworth Barracks. And I went in with one of my buddies from the company, and we just, did a little sightseeing, and at night you couldn't do much. And took a few rides on the tubes and went here and there, and most of the guys, they're funny experiences, There's these working girls all over the place there. Let me tell you. One guy was, we didn't see it, but one guy was telling us it was just dusk, just getting dark, and some guy had this girl in this doorway up against the plate glass, and he sees this bobby coming along. You could tell it was a bobby with a big hat, big cap on him, and the guy's thinking, "Hey, here's where this guy's going to catch it now." And Bobby sees him in there, he taps the soldier on the shoulder, he says, "Mind the glass now, mind the glass."
Can you think of anything else that you'd like to get reported?
Ah, gee. Let's see. No, England. I can't think of anything. I can remember. No, I cannot. Just right at the moment, no. Probably when I leave, I'll think of all sorts of things, but those are the details.
All right.
Like I say, I'm not good on details.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. It was a pleasure.